Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Kevin Rosales. I am a faculty member in our Child, Adolescent, and Family Studies Department. And as part of your CAF's 2200 lectures for today, we are going to cover faculty research and projects that are available for you all in our department. In terms of our agenda and the goals for today, we are first going to talk about what research is, how research labs function, both within our department and generally across the university. We are going to also learn about research that is being conducted within our CABS department under the direction of numerous and various faculty members. And finally, just a few tips and resources on getting involved in research, both in our department mainly, but also potentially across campus. Now, I'd like to jump into two essential questions that really do pave the way for the rest of the lecture for today. One is, what are research labs? And the other, how do research labs work? Now, before I get into the meat and bones of these two questions, I just want to start off with a personal story, really about my own experience as an undergrad. And so many of you may or may not know, but I am a Cal State San Bernardino alumni or alumnus. I graduated with a dual bachelor's degree in psychology and child development back in 2016, so almost 10 years now. And even that is a little bit crazy to hear out loud. But going through my undergraduate program, I would hear the word research be thrown around quite often, whether it was in classes or just hallway chatter. And I, in the moment, processed it as maybe many of you do, thinking about research that is done with rats, or just knowing that it involved people who wear long white lab coats, right? But really, that was just a very limited understanding of what research really was until, of course, I became much more involved on campus and through research programs, the honors program, etc. And then I really gained a much deeper appreciation and, of course, understanding of what research really was. And so, research tends to be a very broad term and is a very broad term that can mean many things. And so I hope that in talking this through with you today, you walk away with a much more versatile and dynamic definition of what research is, and of course, hopefully instill some curiosity and potentially interest in wanting to pursue research experience of your own. Okay, so with that said, what are research labs? Okay, think of a research lab like a sports team or a theater group. Everyone has a role to play. There's a coach or a director that ends up usually being the faculty lead, with maybe assistant coaches, right, or the casting team, which could be essentially graduate students or senior undergrads. And then your team members, right, that usually end up being folks like all of you, right, student researchers. Together, as a research lab, right, the team works together towards a goal. And that is, in our particular department, answering questions about how children, adolescents, and families develop. Now, that is a broad scope, and within that scope, our faculty address many different nuances to this general idea of children, adolescents, and families. So each faculty member has their own specialty and tend to publish and conduct research, present at conferences within that subspecialty of our broader field. Now, what a lab actually is depends on the nature of the research. It can be a physical room down in an obscure basement, right, of a university. Those do exist. But in our department, it's actually very probable that most research labs actually exist out in the community. That can mean school settings, counseling settings, or other community-based contexts. So, in essence, they're not just a physical room with equipment. It really is a community of scholars. A lab is where ideas are generated, we can test them, and share them to the broader scientific community or the general public at large. For example, in child and family studies, labs often look like studies that are being run, again, on campus through the means of observations, experiments, surveys, or even interviews. Part of the research process is to analyze data, and that is where implementing statistics takes place, maybe coding themes for interviews or things of that nature. It could also mean reading or discussing research articles. In grad school, that was a big thing for me. Going through my PhD program, every Friday at 5 p.m. we had lab meeting, and lab meeting usually entailed of discussing a empirical research article that our faculty investigator or PhD advisor thought was important for us to know and talk about as we formed ourselves in terms of being experts in our particular fields. Okay. A lab can also engage in things like presenting findings at conferences or other community-based events. And so a lab, again, is really a space for a scholarly community where a lot of intellectual work occurs, and we tend to try to disseminate that work in one way or another. So why do labs exist? Why is research one of the important activities that happens at our university, but also at many universities worldwide? One of the primary goals of a research lab is to advance knowledge, to answer questions, in our case, about children, adolescents, and family development. Also in that, to train students, right? Labs are like apprenticeships, giving undergrads like all of you real experience with seeking truth or seeking knowledge and using that knowledge to inform and better the human condition or the lives of children, again, adolescents and families. It's also, at a broader level, just piggybacking off of that, a endeavor to really impact the world, hopefully in a positive way, so that research can help as a guide for the practice of parents, for the practice of teachers, clinicians, and hopefully, especially nowadays, policymakers. And so all of you as students are not really, right, just helpers, but you are really junior researchers. And so it is one of my excitements in my role as faculty to work on research, but especially to work on research with students. I always tell my classes that I was once like all of you, and I could say that I was essentially in your shoes, walking the same pockets of campus and sitting in most of the same seats that all of you sit in now. And so for me, getting involved in research was really not just a life-changing journey at the personal level, but for my professional career, it really was pivotal. And so it did open many paths and many doorways to essentially getting into a graduate program, as was my PhD, networking with many different people and scholars all around the United States and even across the world, and then essentially being prepared to come back and teach here and now be able to share all of that knowledge and create more knowledge with all of you. So some of the roles that you all can take on as undergraduate researchers can be things like collecting data, for example, observing children in classrooms, coding parent-child interactions, things of that sort, entering and analyzing data, reviewing literature and writing summaries relating to that literature, helping present at conferences, or even creating your own research projects as part of the honors program. So this is really where the transition begins to form from student to researcher. And so getting involved in research really is a interactive way to become much more intimate with your growing knowledge about children, adolescents, and families, right? It helps you get a feel for what it's like to create that knowledge alive, right? A lot of the textbooks that you all read, that is past research data, right? Becoming involved in research now means that you are creating that data and that knowledge today that will one day hopefully make it into those wonderful textbooks that we all love to read, right? Um, so participating, right, again, means stronger grad school applications, maybe boosting up your professional skills, or even potentially publishing and talking about this work at conference presentations. So I really went a little bit deep there in terms of what research labs are, but also all of the activities and outcomes that can be tied with a research lab. Now, second question here, how do research labs work? There is great variation and variability in this. Some labs, like mine, for example, the Mind Lab, is on campus, and primarily we look at questions about human cognition in college students, right? So a lot of the work that my research assistants conduct is campus-based, right? However, other labs, as you'll learn about in the next several slides now, will not take place on campus, right? But will take place in schools or in counseling centers or in other community-based settings, right? And the way that the labs tend to work on a day-to-day basis does depend on what projects are going on at the time, right? Is the lab transitioning from one older project to a newer project? Are they in the data collection phase, or are they in the data analysis phase, or potentially even in the writing phase? So again, it does depend on where the lab is at that particular point in time, right? And maybe even how new the lab is, for example, that, and I say that with my lab in mind, right? My lab is one of the newer labs on campus, and so at this point we are still fully setting up, have a couple of projects going, but other labs are well-oiled machines by now, have a process, have a pipeline, have a streamlined process for how things work, and so those tend to be at different phases compared to others, right? But it really does depend on, again, the nature of the work and where the work is at that particular point in time. Now, a great question to address is who typically conducts university research, right? Maybe if you're a transfer student, one noticeably different feeling in the air that you get at now being at a four-year institution is a greater emphasis on research, right? In our department, and really across all departments at our university, we can distinguish between two types of faculty. On the left here, we have tenure track faculty, which usually serve as the principal investigators on an ongoing research program. In essence, they are the leaders of their research labs, right? They usually do research as part of a collaborative effort, or maybe they stick to their own lab, right, and conduct research within their lab with not many collaborations ongoing, right? Either or is fair game. Okay? They're very familiar with research procedures and programs, and the reason for that is because tenure track faculty, beyond teaching in the classroom, also have the responsibility of conducting research and also doing service-related work. So given the added responsibility, tenure track faculty tend to be more involved in the research process, mentoring students through the research process, and jointly producing research output, again, that at the scientific level advances knowledge within that field, but also at the applied level aims to inform practice out in the real world as it pertains, for example, in our department, to children, adolescents, and families. Okay. On the other hand, we have lecturer faculty. Lecturer faculty, their primary responsibility is to teach. However, while that is true, right, and maybe necessarily don't have the added research responsibility, they are very knowledgeable in terms of our department, especially, very knowledgeable of the research process and programs that involve research. So if you would like to sit down and talk to tenure track faculty or lecturer faculty about the research process in general, both types of faculty would be able to provide you with very informative and important information related to the research process, right? Now, if your curiosity is to join a research lab and you're interested in talking with the faculty lead for a particular research lab, then looking through our tenure track faculty list will certainly get you to that point in your experience of wanting, or in your process of wanting to seek these experiences. Okay? All right. So with that said, over the next couple of slides, you will now hear from our faculty leads, our principal investigators, all of them being tenure track faculty, and they will explain and give you an overview of their wonderful labs and all of the important work that they do. All right, so like I just mentioned, over the next several slides, you will hear our tenure track faculty talk about their own research labs, give you information about the nature of the research that they address and pursue and explore, and potentially a overview about how to get involved. If you still have questions, and wonderful if you do, please reach out to all of the faculty that you are interested in talking to or working with, and follow up potentially with a meeting, could be Zoom, could be in person, to get a chance at learning more about getting involved. All right, so with that said, hopefully you enjoy the explanations and learning about the research that occurs in our department.
Hello, my name is Eugene Wang. I'm a faculty in the Child Development, Adolescent, and Family Studies Department and the faculty director for the BFAST Lab. BFAST stands for Building Executive Function for Academic Success Training. In this slide, there's a brief description of the lab, and I'll provide some additional information here. The BFAST Lab is a community-based research program that focuses on the effectiveness of cognitive training for building skills like working memory, attention, cognitive flexibility, and processing speed. They're important to doing well and persisting in school. We work with justice-impacted adolescents in day schools, 2nd to 8th grade students with learning differences, and university students on the Cal State campus. Our research lab is highly active and provides you with opportunities to engage in clinically based intervention work and research experiences, such as presenting at professional conferences. Many of the research assistants in the lab have grad school goals, such as being a regular education teacher, a special education teacher, school psychology, school counseling, clinical or counseling psychology, and social work. Some of the RAs go on to PhD programs with specializations in school psychology, child development, developmental psychology, and clinical psychology. If you're looking to expand your experiences beyond the classroom while you complete your major and have an interest in school-related research, please reach out. You can contact me via email at ewong@csusb.edu. I look forward to having a conversation with you soon and sharing more about our work and how you can be an important part of the research group.
Hi everyone, my name is Lisa Looney and I'm a professor in the Child, Adolescent, and Family Studies Department. My research lab focuses on work that is rooted in educational and school contexts. In the Be More Lab, which is short for Beliefs and Motivation Research, we focus on understanding the experiences of students and of educators and of parents. At the heart of what we do, we are working to understand motivation, why people are driven to complete certain tasks, how their belief systems shape that motivation, and how these beliefs and motivations develop over time within the educational settings. So for example, we might study how a student's confidence in their abilities affects their persistence in school, or how parents' beliefs about education influence the support they provide their children. We're also interested in the ways educators' practices can foster or hinder motivation and engagement in the classroom. Ultimately, the goal of the Be More Lab is to better understand the factors that contribute to positive learning experiences and outcomes. Another important part of our research lab, and really any research lab in the department, is to build connections between students and faculty and among students themselves. So research is not just about generating data, although that's an important part. It's also about building a community of learners, and learners who are motivated to ask questions, to dig into problems, and share insights and curiosity. So I welcome all students. No prior research is required. No prior research experience is required. So if you're curious, if you're motivated and willing to learn, there's definitely a place for you in the Be More Lab. I offer flexibility to fit your schedule and opportunities to gain real research experience that can strengthen your academic and your professional path. So in short, my lab is about studying motivation and belief systems in education. It's about building collaborative relationships. It's about providing opportunities for students to engage in meaningful research. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, I'd love to connect with you and talk with you more about how you can get involved. So please click the link and reach out to me.
All right, so one of the labs that takes place within our department is the Mind Lab that is led by myself in conjunction with, of course, all of the wonderful RAs and undergrads and graduate students that form part of this lab. The Mind Lab really is a collaborative team, and what we do primarily is investigate questions about cognition, both in children through adulthood. I tend to have two strands of work. One I call my basic cognitive research, where we look at theoretical questions related to the nature of cognitive abilities like working memory, executive functions, attention, or intelligence in, again, children through adulthood, figuring out the best ways to measure all of these abilities. And my second line of work is the applied cognitive work that I do in collaboration with the BFAST lab, which you already heard about. And that work seeks to examine interventions to improve cognitive abilities in children and adolescents. A lot of the populations that we work with tend to have myriad of learning differences, and so our goal is to try to decrease or support some of that symptomology with the hopes that that transfers over to better academic performance in the classroom. Being part of my lab essentially would equip you with lots of knowledge in terms of how cognition works, how children think, how adolescents think, and how adults think. Look at ways that we can improve that thinking, and exploring both of these questions through sophisticated statistics, right? And sometimes the word statistics tends to instill a little bit of fear in folks, but trust me, I was there many, many times. I'm not really a math-oriented person. So now when I think about the professional that I am, to think that I'm even just a little bit knowledgeable of statistics does shock me and still amaze me to this day. And, in part that was, and thanks to the wonderful statistics professors, and including my advisor, throughout my career that really broke down that fear and made statistics very digestible, very doable, and really your friend when it comes to doing research. So in joining my lab, you would get firsthand experience with just learning more about statistics. How do we implement different statistical techniques to address different questions adequately? In addition to just learning more about cognition at large, right? And so you can be involved in data collection process with a couple of projects that we have going on now. You can be part of the data analysis process, the numerous meetings on talking about different articles, and even forming part of presentations out at professional conferences in different states. And that really is where it becomes really fun to be an academic, because you get to travel, you get to work a little bit, but you get to see new places, new states, new foods, and so on and so forth. So with that said, if you're interested in cognitive development, if you're interested in learning more about how children think, how to help support thinking in children and through adulthood, please reach out to me at kevin.rosales@csusb.edu. You do not need to have any prior research experience to join my lab. Again, if you're just interested in gaining some research experience, even if cognition may not be your cup of tea, but you just want to form part of a research lab, again, please email me. I'd be more than happy to talk with you about research in general, but also what it looks like to be involved in the Mind Lab. Okay? So with that said, I look forward to your email and to learning more about you and your interests. Thank you.
Wilcox to talk about the work that I have going on. So I don't have traditional research labs right now. As a department chair, I really don't have opportunities or time to conduct research in the way that I did before I became chair, but I do have grant-funded projects that I supervise. So I have 2 projects. I have Quality Start, which is in both Riverside and San Bernardino counties. And for this project, we go out into the community and we assess child care programs to assess their quality, and then we use the data that we collect to support coaching efforts. So we provide reports to coaches who then go help child care programs to improve their quality. So with Quality Start, there are paid assessor positions. So if you are interested in working as an assessor, please reach out to me and I can put you in touch with the folks who can get you going with an interview and see if that's something that will work out for you. I also have a project called Child Care Access Means Parents in Schools. So we provide supports to student parents on campus. We help pay for their child care. We provide virtual services and not virtual materials, but materials that they can take home with them. We have a student parent study center on campus. So we are always looking for volunteers, people who are interested in participating in those programs to get more experience with direct support to this particular population. So if either of those projects sounds interesting to you, please don't hesitate to reach out and I'll be happy to provide you with more information.
Now, hopefully you've all had a wonderful time learning about our different faculty and the labs that they lead, and hopefully one or more of the labs that you heard about is interesting to you and you're thinking about reaching out to some of these faculty. Again, we are really a close group when it comes to the work that we do, and we are all very accessible. So hopefully you find some time to talk with us more about becoming involved in research in our department. Now, one of the things that I do want to talk about, and I did say a little bit about this early on, and this is to address the question of why participate in research activities as an undergraduate student, right? What value can you gain from that? So, first and foremost, if you are thinking about moving on to graduate school, having research experience is becoming and has been becoming more and more of a baseline minimum requirement. Now, that's not to say that that is true throughout different graduate programs, because, for example, if you're thinking of a master's level program, having done intensive research in undergrad is not necessarily a requirement. Does it help for your application? Does it make you more marketable and appealing to a graduate school applications committee? 100%. But it does not mean that if you do not have any research experience that you're not going to be accepted necessarily into the program, right? However, if you are intending to eventually, whether it's straight from undergrad or even from a master's, go eventually into a PhD program, then research does become an absolute critical part of your application. Having that experience does mean the difference between getting into a program versus not getting into a program. So if you're thinking about graduate school, getting involved in research earlier as opposed to later in your undergraduate experience is highly, highly recommended, not just, by myself, but also from other faculty in our department. You will hear that time and time again. So the earlier, the better. So again, please reach out to any of us in terms of getting involved in research. Second, becoming involved in research does polish up a lot of professional skills that, let's say you say, you know what, graduate school is just not for me, right? I am done with school. It's not necessarily the next step that I want to take. Excellent, right? There are many routes that you can take after your undergraduate degree that becoming part of research in undergrad can also prepare you for, okay? And so that is things like working as a team, right? We talked a lot about research labs being like a team in which you have to communicate, right? You have to organize, you have to think of logistics for collecting data, for putting together interview questions, etc. In addition to that, you get hands-on experience with writing. You get hands-on experience with potentially presenting at conferences. Public speaking skills are polished in that way. You get hands-on experience with data cleaning, data structure, data manipulation, data analysis, right? All of those skills are incredibly valuable to potential employers, whether it's in schools, whether it's for the public sector, for the private sector, etc., right? All of these skills are very transferable. So if you are wanting to be a bit more competitive after your undergraduate degree for a potential employer, becoming part of a research lab can 100% polish up skills that can be valuable for those future employers. Okay. Now, in addition to that, as a byproduct really of working in a research lab, now you have access to letters of recommendation, lines of skills that you can put on your curriculum vitas or your resumes. So all of a sudden your professional presence becomes a little bit more bulked up, again, more appealing, and your chances of landing that job that you maybe have been keeping an eye on all of a sudden become much higher, right? As opposed to maybe not having these skills more polished up than they would be, okay? In addition to that, right, there can be real products that come out of doing research. For example, publications and conference presentations. Having these on your resumes or your CVs are really helpful, right? And they really, really do impress admissions committees for grad school, especially, right? Being able to have your name on a manuscript or on a publication shows your commitment, right? And your development as a researcher. And so PhD programs and of course master's level programs love to see students involved at that level. So those are the more professionally oriented outcomes of being a researcher. However, even in speaking for myself as well, there are a lot of personal benefits of being part of the research process, right? You tend to grow as a person, you tend to establish many new friendships. I still have friendships from my undergraduate days, and a lot of those friendships happened in my involvement in research, right? They tended to be other peer research assistants that, became really good friends with me. And of course, in graduate school, that cohort that you come in with and exit out with becomes like family, right? And so now you have a network of professionals, of course, leading back into the professional aspect of this, that you can reach out to or recommend people to, or, potentially even for yourself, have more doors open for you, or vice versa. So personally, right, you tend to grow, you tend to meet new people, and you really do learn a lot more about yourself, your interests, things that are your cup of tea, things that are not your cup of tea. And so really becoming part of research activities does fill both of the aspects that you're developing in school, which is your personal development as well as your professional development. So with that said, go ahead and check out this video from the CSUSB Office of Student Research, otherwise known as OSR, to give you just another, give you more bits and pieces of information about why it's valuable to become part of the research process on campus. Now, just to get a little bit more specific in terms of research involvement, what does being a research assistant involve? Again, just to preface this a little bit, this may look very different depending on the lab that you are looking into, which is why it's important to first have an initial meeting, an initial interaction with that faculty lead, so that you gain more information about what does being involved in that particular lab look like. But at a general level, I think that these are some things here that tend to be true across the board. One, having assigned time commitment. In other words, regardless of the lab that you are a part of, there will be some out-of-class time that you will need to set aside to either attend lab meetings, to potentially collect data, to potentially read articles on the side, or form part of the writing process, etc. So having some time set aside on a weekly or monthly basis will be one of those involvement time commitments. Okay. This can also mean supporting faculty research in various ways. Again, there are different levels and phases to the research process. Where that particular lab is at that time of year does dictate what your experience will look like, right? Maybe it's data collection, maybe it's coding interviews, maybe it's analysis, right? Maybe right now they're looking at grant writing to get funding for their particular lab, right? That again dictates what your support will look like. Okay? Sometimes you will get to conduct your own independent research under the direction of the faculty mentor. This is especially true if you're part of the honors program, which I direct. Often your own independent research can stem out of the broader scope of the research that is being done within that lab, right? You can kind of take a piece of the pie and work on that on your own, of course in collaboration with your mentor, and part of your experience can be taking on one aspect of the lab's research questions and kind of leading that yourself, which is also incredibly valuable experience, especially as you're thinking about graduate school. And then finally, really you gain experience with the ins and outs of research, especially within that particular lab. You get to learn about subfields and slices of the field that you may not have been otherwise familiar with had it not been for your experience in that lab. So again, it does involve these multiple levels, but specific visions of what you can see yourself doing does vary depending on the lab that you're involved with. All right, so now as we culminate our lecture, I just wanted to leave you all with some tips for connecting to research opportunities. Okay, and again, also if you just want to learn more about my own work or other faculty's work, again, please reach out to us via our emails. You can find all of that information on our department website. So make sure that you click through all of that. There's tons of valuable information for all of you there, so make sure to look on there. But here, I'd like to point you to an APA article with 5 tips on getting involved in research. So if you just click these hyperlinks, it'll take you there. Tons of good information within APA on what it means to get involved, how to get involved, what that can look like. Again, reaching out to faculty to learn more about research opportunities, right, that they may have available. We are very, very good with, just taking in students, right? We love working with all of you. We have, really an open door policy when it comes to taking you all in terms of research. Of course, some of us may have applications for labs and things of that sort, but nonetheless, right, we are very open to working with all of you. Maybe you want to participate in a research training program, right? You can check out, again, the Office of Student Research. That really is the office that constantly is working hard to give you all the research experience opportunities that can really enrich your time here at CSUSB and hopefully prepare you for your other steps outside of CSUSB once you are graduated from here. And then finally, really, this is a plug for the honors program, but if you want to work one-on-one with one of our faculty, tenure track faculty that you heard about earlier, please don't hesitate to reach out to me to learn more about the honors program. So the honors program, I'll give you a quick summary now, is a 1-year experience starting in the fall of every year and ending, of course, in the spring, where you will be working with a faculty member who you have overlapping research interests with. Again, just like is the case with becoming part of the research process in general, right, what your honors experience looks like, again, can vary depending on the lab that you join. But the goal is to give you a research experience, right? As part of the honors program, you will take a seminar with me in the fall where we will learn more about research, hone more of those research skills like oral presentations, writing, and critically thinking about the research process, research methodology, and even some statistics, right? And in tandem, you will be meeting often with your faculty mentors, learning about their research expertises, and you becoming your own research expert in that field as well. And so by the end of the program, right, not only will you have research experience, but you also graduate with departmental honors. You have access to at least a couple of letters of recommendation, and really it just does give you a competitive advantage for graduate school especially, but also with just joining the workforce. So if you are interested in the honors program, please reach out to me and I'm happy to give you more information. But with that said, that does wrap up this lecture on faculty research and projects. Hopefully some of this has been motivating and informative to you all, and I look forward to chatting with many of you, as I know is the case for all of our faculty. So thank you for tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.